Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special evening of storytelling. I'm Emily Handlin, Associate Curator at the KMA. This night is, again, so special to all of us here, and it's in conjunction with our exhibition Arrivals, which closes on January 23rd. So if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, I would urge you to do so. Guest curated by Heather Ewing, Arrivals explores American origin stories through 5 centuries of art. Organized around a select series of arrival moments, the exhibition invites us to reflect on our national mythologies and history. But the exhibition is also fundamentally about storytelling, the stories we tell ourselves and our families, and the stories we tell about our country and its history. So we thought it appropriate for us to invite storytellers from New York to share their own stories of immigration and identity. And I can think of no better person to serve as our wonderful MC for the night than Esmeralda Santiago. Esmeralda Santiago was born in Puerto Rico and came to the United States when she was 13 years old. She's the author of 3 memoirs, 2 novels, a children's book, and has co-edited 2 anthologies of Latino literature. This is a really short summary of her many accomplishments, but just for the sake of time, I'm going to cut it short here and pass the virtual mic off to Esmeralda. Thank you so much for joining us, Esmeralda.
Thank you, Emily. I'm just thrilled to be here this evening. I'm just very, very excited for the evening that lies ahead for us with these wonderful, wonderful storytellers. I have listened to all of them when I'm driving or on the Moth podcasts. I just know that we're gonna have a really wonderful and intriguing, exciting, full of laughter, and also perhaps remembering some of our experiences. I'm old enough to remember being a child sitting around a fire pit with the elders in my family, and they would tell stories. Some of them were traditional stories that they had heard from their own parents, and a lot of them would just tell stories about things that had happened recently. At the time that I was living in this very rural part of Puerto Rico called Mcgill, many of the residents there were pretty much people of the land, and many of them were not literate. And so there was one of the things that we were part of as children was when the people who did read the newspapers or had a chance to listen to the news, they would then tell what they had read. And so that was a different kind of storytelling, pre-television, pre-everything. And so there was this tradition already of just talking about our lives and about what happens outside of our little, very closed off and remote community. So it's very thrilling to me to be among these wonderful storytellers who maintain this tradition of telling stories about their experiences, about the world that they live in, and so to give us a chance of who we are among our communities, but also because they have that gift. Not everybody can do that. It's really hard to be in public, and it's very difficult to know what story to tell. I'm very fortunate that as a writer, I write my stories and put them in books, and I don't hear an audience commenting because it would be terrifying. But I think for these performers, they are usually in a live audience, and they get all that energy. I hope that you all watching us today will be sending this energy towards them, because it really does make a difference for the performer when you can clap, or I know that there's a little emoji thing that can go on. And just let them know that you appreciate what they're doing. I'd like to introduce our first our storyteller, and her name is Vanusha Trevino. She is an actress, she's a storyteller and a musician. She's from Poland. She has toured internationally with New York City punk band FUR, or F-U-R, I'm not sure. As an actress, she was seen recently with the Worcester Group in A Pink Chair, directed by Elizabeth Lecomte, the Centre Pompidou in Paris, the Performing Garage in New York, and Skirball Center in New York. She also performed internationally with her solo play, Wonder Bread. She was a part of the Joe's Pub New York Literary Salon, Women of Letters, and This Alien Nation. A Moth Double Gram Slam winner, she is a regular with Moth Mainstage. The story Scream is a part of This Alien Nation anthology that is available through Harper. And please welcome with your either electronic or real claps, Vanusha Trevino.
The evening when I went to say goodbye to my favorite aunt, before I was to leave my country, Poland, for good, she placed around my neck, the way medals are given at the Olympics, a necklace made out of 10 rolls of toilet paper, and said, "Here you go, child. Show those Americans we have our own paper to wipe our asses with." She didn't know that Americans were not aware and didn't care that in 1981, Poland was going through a shortage of toilet tissue. In fact, we were using Pravda as Soviet paper, which means truth in Russian, for such needs. This was not an act of political subversion. We did it because Pravda was softer and cheaper than our own daily news. I imagine my aunt didn't want me to enter America as yet another poor relative with nothing else to offer except kielbasa. These rolls of toilet paper were to give me a sense of worldly confidence and dignity. I did not leave my country, family, friends, and everything that was dear to me for an abundance of tissue paper. I was a student at a music school, and after one of my violin lessons, the professor said to me, "Cherish these moments. These will be the best years of your life." Well, his statement filled me with dread. I wanted more from life than college memories, more than to be a music teacher at my hometown. And I was not ready to get married at 21, although the fact that I didn't have a boyfriend yet caused deep concern within my family. I came home one day and was surprised to find my parents in the living room, dressed in their Sunday best, even though it was only Monday. Sitting across from them was a couple with who I assumed to be their son. I recognized the man. He was a tombstone maker and had a little shop next to our neighborhood cemetery. Us local kids felt pity for him because he walked with crutches and his body shook unpredictably. On the coffee table was my mother's favorite camembert cheese, sliced tomatoes, and baguette. There was also a bottle of vodka. I figured this had to be a special occasion because camembert was rare and expensive. They all looked at me, except for the son. He was a blonde, thin guy of medium height. He was just staring down at his own shoes. I immediately smelled a rat. My parents wanted to find a husband for me. The awkwardness of this young man's body expressed everything I was feeling inside the repulsion towards him and myself for letting this moment go on without any protest. After what seemed to be an eternity, my mom finally said to me, why don't you go and put a pretty dress on and come back to meet this nice young man? I smiled politely and I left the room without saying anything. I never said much, but instead of putting pretty dress on, I snuck into the basement and climbed up the coal chute towards a tiny window to escape. I wanted to escape this feeling of insignificance and being poor, although my family never was poor. Nobody lacked basic things in Poland. Medical care and education were free. There was plenty of work. I've never seen homeless people on the streets. My own family was better off than many others. We had a 2-story house, a big land, and we had our own car. But what we had paled with the colorful life that I've seen in French and American movies. It was while watching Woody Allen's Manhattan that I heard for the first time Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. And the sound of that music filled me with wildness and a desire for a much bigger and adventurous life. I wanted to learn how to speak English so well that nobody could tell me nothing. American English, the sound of which is rounder, thicker, and louder than the language I grew up with. This American English, which while learning later would hurt my jaw from stretching it into so many unaccustomed to me directions. Polish was beautiful, soft, full of nostalgia and history, and it was dragging my soul down. I wanted to live in America because it was the most powerful country in the world, and I wanted to feel powerful. It could only be in New York City, the coolest of them all, this metropolis, which I met for the first time on the pages of my geography book when I was 9. The caption underneath a tiny black and white photo set of a skyscraper said, New York, a city where the buildings go so high, they seem to touch the sky, and the traffic is so dense, it's faster to walk than to take a taxi sometimes. How's that even possible? I could count on my fingers the numbers of cars in my hometown. I wanted to know this city as intimately as any good cab driver does. I wanted to jog in Central Park the way Jill Clayburgh jogged, an unmarried woman. I wanted to walk in a nonchalant way, the way Americans walk in the world, self-assured, not caring about their wrinkled clothes, messy hair, or unmatched socks. I wanted to get away from the beige elegance of Europe, where bright colors were reserved only for children and adults were considered cheap and vulgar. I still remember the time when my music school was hosting an American choir from California. We were taking them to the opera. And for days before, my friends and I were exchanging clothes, borrowing shoes to make sure that we look impressive. The Americans slid into the opera hall with such ease, wearing casually jeans and sneakers. And we stood there feeling like such fools for thinking that we can cover up with nice clothes. This shame we felt for not being part of a Western civilization. I left Poland shortly before martial law began. 1 more month and the trip would have become not possible. When I asked my American relatives to send me government-approved invitations so I could visit their small house in Long Island, they had no idea that I had bigger plans in mind than just to study language. The moment I could introduce myself and say, I would like to find a job, I was able to find my first American work. It was at Burger King in Valley Stream. I will never forget the day when I got fired from it, barely 2 weeks after I began. Apparently, there was something wrong with my burgers. As I was crying uncontrollably, because the manager asked me to immediately give up my brown and yellow Burger King uniform. I loved that outfit. We didn't have polyester in Poland. And those 2 weeks that I got to wear it, I felt like I was truly an American. And as I continued sobbing in the bathroom, the cleaning lady, I don't remember what country she was from, came over to me, hugged me, wiped away my tears and said, "Don't worry, honey, you can get a better job at Dunkin' Donuts." And as I was about to leave, she said, "Better yet, learn how to type. Typing will give you a better future in America." So I got another job at a local factory near my relative's place to pay for the classes and for the old electric typewriter to practice on. And the classes were at a community college. It was too far from me to make it on time on a bus after work. So I got to the first class and I stood up in front of everyone and said, "Does anyone lives near me, and could you give me a ride for the rest of the semester?" And this young woman with black shiny hair raised her hand and said, "I will." And for the next few months, every Tuesday, the Italian Anna picked me up in her cream color Renault. There was a pink plush dog hanging from her rear view mirror. One time when we were on a highway going from class back home, she rolled down the windows and without warning, screamed so loud as if someone was ripping her skin without anesthetics. I have never been in the presence of that kind of a human sound. Afterwards, she took a deep breath and smiled and apologetically said, "Nobody speaks English at my home. I have to take care of everyone. It has been very hard." "I could never scream like that," I said to her, to which she replied, "I'm not gonna stop the car until you do." She passed our exit on a highway. I kept looking at the pink plush dog to try to get courage. But every time Anna counted 1, 2, 3, go, nothing came out of me. Finally, after 1 hour of going deep into Long Island, I let out a scream. 21 years of silence got released onto Long Island Expressway. Thank you.
Whoa. That is so moving. And you bring us so many aspects of the experience of us arrivals in the United States, both the longing and the courage that it takes to do what you did and what some of us have done. Some of us because we were old enough to know that there was a different place that we could be in, and some of us, like me, I was brought here, so I didn't get a choice, and differently from your experience, my family screamed a lot. So my experience was always seeking silence. So that was very, very moving and very beautiful. And you know, I love kielbasa. So,
me too.
So it's not the only thing I know about Poland, but I know that's one of the really good things that come from your beautiful country. Thank you so much, Vanusha. We are very, very thrilled to listen to our next storyteller. Marta Ruiz Perilla is an artist who is based in the Lower East Side. Her love for storytelling is evident in her writing, live performances, and artwork, which includes painting, sculpture, and installation. Her current work investigates facets of immigrant life in the context of parenthood, domesticity, and the viral pandemic. Ruiz Perilla's work explores issues pertaining to folklore, popular belief, cultural hallmarks, isolation, and the Colombian diaspora. Her work is part of corporate, private, and public collections nationally and internationally. Born and raised in Bogota, Colombia, she was honored with the Christie's Education Graduate Fellowship in 2001, and later earned a master's degree in modern and contemporary art. A painter and performance artist for over 25 years, Ruiz Perilla has captivated audiences with her stories since the age of 5, debuting with The Moth in 2016. She lives in New York with her children, her husband, Mark, their dog, Queso, and a whole lot of stories. Welcome, Marta.
Thank you. I was about to graduate when I told my mother I had been assigned to do my dental school residency at a hospital in a small town in Colombia called Neiva. It was 1992, I was 21 years old, and we lived in Bogota, Colombia. This was the Colombia of Pablo Escobar, of daily bombings and kidnappings, of government corruption and assassinations, of paramilitary groups and massacres. It was also a time in Colombia of the FARC, one of the oldest guerrilla movements in modern history. It was a time when the war between opposing forces had become normal to us. You heard a loud noise, like when a car backfires. You went down, you waited out, you got up, you dusted off, and you moved on. Neiva was small, hot, and violent. Add to that the possibility of guerrillas and narco-traffic, and the prospects were pretty scary, especially for a young woman like me, who at the time had never lived away from home. My mother was really upset, so she called my dad, who at the time lived in Granada, another small violent town in another area of Colombia. And my dad came to the phone and asked me if I was scared. And I said, yes. And he said, vea, mija, you know how I live here and I have worked as a lawyer here for so long. And you know why I stay? Because if the good people that can help don't stay, then the bad people who don't want to help take over. So you go where you're being called to serve, and you help the people that need you the most. And with that, I arrived one April morning at the hospital in Neiva. And my first impression was that the hospital was overcrowded and underfunded, but also that there were plenty of people helping it stay afloat. My daily work at the hospital began at 7 a.m., doing the rounds with the resident physicians. After that, I would go to my office and do my outpatient practice, which focused exclusively on dentistry. I would take one patient every 15 minutes and 2 short breaks during the day until 5 p.m. At night, I would be on call at the ER for any emergencies that dealt with injuries of neck and above. That's how I learned how to put eyelids, nostrils, and earlobes back onto people. The room where I lived at the hospital, on the top floor of the hospital, faced the roof terrace, where I quickly came to find out was inhabited by thousands of bats. At night, I had to leave the window open because temperatures raised up to 105 degrees. And there was only AC in the operating rooms at the hospital. So I figured that by wrapping myself in a soaking wet beach towel, I could avoid the heat, combat the heat, and avoid the bats. And these, I figure, after one night when I woke up from a deep sleep to find a baby bat comfortably sleeping next to me on my pillow, and another one taking a bath in the glass of drinking water that I had left on my night table. Another one of these hot nights, I went to sleep. And the next thing I remember is standing in the middle of my room, being held by the arm by a man with a rifle. I don't know what time it was. Maybe the early hours of the morning. It was dark outside. I noticed there was another person at the door, guarding the door. Both of these people had rags that wrapped around their heads and faces, leaving only their eyes visible. The man holding my arm ordered me to get dressed, and it was then that I realized I had been pulled out of my beach towel and I was standing in my underwear in front of these people. I rushed to get dressed, and while I was looking in the dark for my clothes, I began to think of my parents. I thought of the stories I had heard of doctors being taken away by the guerrillas and never returned. So once dressed, I asked the man who had been holding me and was now pointing with his rifle at me if I could leave my parents a note. And he said no. He grabbed me by the arm and rushed me out of the room. We went down the emergency stairwell, which was lined with men dressed like him and the other person, and addressed him as commander. I didn't want to look at any of them. I kept looking at my feet going down the stairs. I didn't want any of them to think that I could remember them or recognize them. When we got to the first floor, I realized the hospital had been seized. I was ordered to go straight to my office and not to speak. So we led down this long corridor, and the farther away we got, the more hopeless I felt. When we got to my office, I noticed the doorknob had been broken. And inside, in the dark, 2 men awaited. I didn't know what else to ask. I was terrified. So I turned to the man pointing at me with the rifle. And he said that I had 3 hours to help him, or I would have to come with them. I didn't know what else to ask, so I said, "Who's the patient?" And from within the shadows, one of the men turned on a flashlight, revealing a boy about 15 years old, wearing this dirty shirt and soiled boots and pants, and his face completely deformed by an exacerbated abscess that made the left side of his face look like a water balloon about to explode. I stepped forward to touch the kid's face, but then I felt the pressure of the rifle on my back. And the voice of the man pointing at me said, "Can you help us or not?" I said yes. I told them to bring him into the office, but I warned him I would have to turn on the lights and all the electric instruments. And he agreed, but he said I should warn him about every move I made before I made it. Once inside, I realized I was going to need an assistant. You see, I couldn't apply any anesthesia. I couldn't make this kid drowsy because I knew they had walked to the hospital and they had to go out on foot. I couldn't apply any anesthesia because given the degree of the infection, I knew that no anesthesia would catch. So I was gonna have to do this without numbing him, and it was going to hurt a lot. He could kick and scream, but he could also bite. I explained this to the commander, who understood and immediately signaled to one of his men, who dropped his rifle on the floor. And when the kid was sitting on the chair, he jumped on him, straddling him at the thighs, facing him, grabbed his arms and held them down, and then turned to me and said, "I'm ready." I had my assistant ready. I was terrified. I had never done this before by myself. I had assisted my professors in some training surgeries. I had also learned about this in my pathology classes, an enormous slides that showed us this type of infection. I had read about it in books and studied it for my partial exams. I knew it by heart, but I had never done it by myself. What I did know was that if I made a mistake in this incision, I could touch a nerve that runs by the area of the face where I needed to operate. And I could cause the paralysis of half of this kid's face for life. I also knew that if I let this infection progress, this kid would go into sepsis and die. And in the back of my heart, I knew that if the army had been notified that these rebels were at the hospital, there could be a crossfire at any time, and I would become collateral damage by the end of the morning. So I sat down behind the chair and wrapped my arm around the kid's head to prevent him from hitting me. I readied the materials I needed. I readied the scalpel and a handful of gauze, and I put on my protective gear. I took a deep breath, and after a long exhale, I made my first incision, small and careful, and I began to drain. I made a bigger incision and I pressed harder. The kid was twitching and turning in that chair. His tears were rolling down his cheeks. He was screaming. It was extremely painful. The pain was excruciating. The smell was nauseating. The man holding him closed his eyes and turned his face away. So I made a bigger cut, but suddenly the kid began to cry uncontrollably, so I had to stop. I looked at him and I told him he was a brave boy. I told him that I could stop any time he needed me to, and I would give him a break, but that we needed to do this so that he would feel better. He looked up and his eyes swelled with tears. He was shivering. This kid was terrified, but so was I. I had a gun pressed against my back while operating on him. I went back to draining as quick as I could. And as I drained, I began to see the relief on the kid's face. I couldn't avoid but thinking about that gun on my back. And every time the kid screamed, the barrel of that gun pressed on my back until the kid couldn't take it anymore. And suddenly he yelled out, "Ay, papá, no más." And with the scream, the man who had been silently pointing at my back answered back to the child, "Almost there, mijo." And it was then that I froze, because I realized whose kid I was cradling in my arms. This was the commander's son. This was not just any kid. If I screw this up, if this kid did not get better, this man will come back looking for me. I was sure of that. I went back to draining, and when I finally was able to find the culprit, I explained to the commander there was a rotten tooth in his mouth, and I had to pull it. It was part of the procedure. The commander agreed, and the child nodded. So I proceeded to pull the tooth. And with every piece of tooth that I pulled, a scream came along. And with every scream, the barrel of that rifle pressed against my spine. It was terrifying. The child was losing his mind. The smell and the tension was palpable in the air. It was close to dawn, and we were running out of time. So I finished the procedure, and I asked if I could get up and get some samples of free antibiotic and other supplies. I reached into my cabinet and grabbed whatever I could. And I told the commander, we're gonna need someone to clean his wound and keep him safe from getting infected. Is there anyone like that? And the commander looked at me. He said, of course, he has a mother. So I handed him the supplies and I explained how the cleaning of the wound should happen. And then he asked me to turn around. He ordered the child off the chair and the kid obeyed immediately, walking around the chair and behind me towards the door of my office. I sat there with my protective gear and closed my eyes and just prayed that I was not going to be shot in the neck. And then I heard his voice from the door. He said that if I didn't move or speak for a half an hour, I would be okay. I nodded and I heard the door close. When I opened my eyes, I still had my protective gear on. On my hands, my latex gloves were covered with the child's blood, and inside my hands were drenched with sweat. I kept reviewing the procedure in my mind. Did I do everything right? Did I forget something? For the following 2 weeks, I was cold despite that heat. I didn't want to eat. Everything made me nauseous. I didn't want to speak. I didn't tell anyone about it, except the police, who came to interrogate me and ask me questions after it had happened. I didn't even tell my parents. I was excused from volunteering at the ER, but I had to continue taking care of my outpatients. Although every time one came in, I would be wondering if it would be the father or the child. And then one day, I got a phone call from the front desk at the hospital. They said that a man had dropped off a package for me. I was scared, but I went to the front desk to find out what it was. And when I got there, the girl at the front desk said, a man left you this. And she handed me an envelope with a note inside. And that, she said, pointing at a sack of oranges leaning against her desk with a live chicken tied to it. I opened the envelope and inside, in a crumpled piece of paper, handwritten, there was a note that said, "De pelao es okay, doctora. There's no need to come back." This sent a wave of relief in my heart because I knew that they could come back. And this time I wouldn't be taking care of their emergencies at the hospital, but back where they were. I went back to the office to take care of my patients. And that night, when I went back to my room, I climbed out of the window onto the roof terrace. I could hear the wings of the bats flapping, and I didn't care. I brought the note with me and matches, and I put it on the floor, and I burnt it. And I burnt it because, frankly, initially I thought that it connected me to these bad people, and I didn't want to be connected to them. But then I also thought, what bad people? You know, in Colombia in the 90s and even today, you don't know who the good people or the bad people are. We are all just people trying to get by in this battle of warlords that nobody's able to stop. That to this day, as you know, we've been trying to stop. These people that had come to me were regular people with mothers and fathers and children with toothaches, capable of love and gratitude amidst all this violence, capable too of killing and kidnapping and hurting. And when I thought about this, I thought about my father's words before I came to do my residency. And he had told me to help those who needed me the most. And I thought that's what I did. So that night I climbed back into my room and I went to sleep. And the following morning, I went back down to the ER and I notified them that I was ready to help the people that needed me the most in Neiva. Thank you. Brush your teeth.
Oh, that was so moving, Marta. We really lived that experience with you. How terrifying it was, and the lesson at the end is something that we all need, really, because good or bad people, they hurt the same, and the good doctor has to do what the good doctor has to do, and that is take care of the patient, whoever they might be. So that was really quite moving and beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And I'm glad that you're okay now. No bats flying around your house or anything like that. It's great. Thank you so much. Well, I'm kind of still verklempt over this. But we have two more wonderful storytellers. And here we go. Our next storyteller is Annie Tan. She's a special education teacher, an activist, a writer, and storyteller. She's based in Chinatown, New York City. Annie fights for her students, public education, teachers' unions, tenants' rights, and Asian American issues, all towards a better world. Yay! Her work has been featured in the New York Times, Huffington Post, New Republic, and PBS's documentary series, Asian Americans. Annie has been featured on the Moth and is currently working on a memoir, double yay. She would also like to remind everyone to support educators who are fighting to keep schools safe with proper PPE and weekly testing of students and staff. Thank you so much for being with us, Annie, and we're excited to listen to your story.
Thank you so much. Martha, I was with you. Just, wow. Just, whew. Yeah, so just a pause for a moment because that was an amazing story. I have only seen my dad cry 3 times in my life. The first time was on the one and only trip we took to China, the one that my mom didn't come on because we didn't have enough money, where we were carrying just food up this overgrown mountain in China. And I didn't know where we were going, but we landed on this gravestone of Chinese characters. And my dad immediately knelt down and started sobbing, this guttural sob going that I'd never heard before. This was his parents' grave, I found out. The one that he was not able to go to because he was in America raising a young me and my 2 brothers. And he couldn't afford the trip back to China. The second time I heard him cry was a few weeks after that, when a relative of mine in China gifted a brand new sky blue iPod Nano to my older brother, which cost maybe $300 or $400 at the time. And my dad begged her, please don't give him this gift. And he was so ashamed that he couldn't afford this for his own son, even though he had spent the better part of 2 decades in America. And the last time I saw him cry was 2 years later when I was 18, when I had just graduated from high school. I was doing a summer job, and this was right after his throat cancer surgery that had left him with a hole in his throat. And I made the mistake of bringing home a receipt from lunch with some friends. I had bought the cheapest item I could at Chevy's, which was a chicken quesadilla for $10. And he saw the amount I had spent And his eyes just began to glow and began to be teary. And it's like, in Toisan and Cantonese, you cannot be spending money like this. He could not work anymore. He had to quit his construction job, which had been holding us down for the better part of 2 decades. My mom was looking for work. And I knew then that I was my parents' retirement plan. My mom was, trying to find odd jobs, but would never be able to find something that provided the whole time. My dad was on disability and Social Security. And all I wanted to do was go to college and to be my own woman and to be home. And because we were broke and because I worked really hard, I got a full ride scholarship to college. So I got to dorm and I got to be out of that house and be my own woman. I let my brothers translate at the doctor's appointments and translate the mail and all that. And then in 2011, when I graduated college, I had the good fortune of graduating at the end of that housing recession, which means no teaching jobs in New York City for elementary school teachers. And so I was able to run away and go to Chicago and lead my own life. And I was really happy in Chicago for 5 years. I lived my own life, dated the boys I wanted to. My dad at one point threatened to disown me because I was dating a white man. And there was one point where he also threatened to disown me again, because that's what my dad does. Spoiler alert, he has not disowned me, but he has threatened many times to disown me. There was one time I came home from a winter break and I was just tired of the back and forth between my dad over the past 5 years because my Cantonese isn't great. I learned English. I had to learn very quickly to translate everything. And my parents, because they were working all the time, never learned English. And so I didn't know how to say I was an activist. I was fighting with my teachers union. And there were just all these things I'm telling you now that I could never say out loud to my parents, which is devastating and horrible. But I wanted something other than the 30-second phone calls that my dad would be like, "Lusik Maya, have you eaten yet?" "No, I haven't, Dad." Or "Yes, I've eaten chicken or broccoli or something." But I didn't know how to say like hummus or there's just so many things that were missing because I wasn't home. I couldn't say it in Chinese. And that's when I decided to move home. Because if I was going to have any kind of relationship besides Dad disowning me from 800 miles away, I had to be home and face them in person, let them feed me meals, let me translate mail in the house, like all that. And it was good for a while. There'd be just random times when in the Chinese newspaper, my mom would see a picture of something that reminded her of something back in China. And she'd be like, "Yeah, you see that rickshaw?" She'd say all this in Cantonese, of course. "This is how your dad and I met. Like I put stuff on the rickshaw and he would push it. And we built a building like that." And I was like, "What?" And then I'd ask for more and they say nothing. They're like, "Oh, no, you don't want to know that." But that's exactly what I wanted to know. There's so much I still don't know, but I find in these random moments when they're just willing to give at least a little tidbit of knowledge from what happened in China. And I will never know that because I don't speak Cantonese. But there were a lot of bad moments like, "Annie, get home at 8 o'clock. I'm a 29-year-old woman being asked by my father to go home at 8 o'clock. No dating, but I should be married already. Where's the house? Even though the New York City housing market's garbage. And it's just, can't I be my own person? Can't I go see my friends?" And I actually, it got to the point where we were just yelling at each other all the time, to the point where I had to see a Chinese American therapist who spoke Cantonese. So I would say to her things like, "Yeah, there was this one time I said, 'I love you' to my dad," and the therapist would be like, "Chinese people don't say 'I love you.' He's never going to say 'I love you.' It's not happening." And he said that to me once, actually. Like, I said, I love you. And he was like, that word, I love you, means nothing. And then I was like, what do I do? I'm doing everything. I'm going with you to doctor's appointments. And my therapist asked me, Annie, why are you fighting so hard to be with your parents? And I started crying out of nowhere. And I said, at least right now, like, I know at some point my dad is going to disown me. And if I have this time right now, that means that he was not a monster the whole time for when he does disown me finally. And my therapist said that there's a wound there. And the first step to healing a wound is to acknowledge it. And that same day, I started looking for apartments in other places in New York City. I think it was a Wednesday. So Friday, I got a call, saw an apartment. Sunday, I signed the lease. Monday, I told my parents I was moving out. And my dad was like, you are the worst child. You are always the worst. You are always the one who wants to be independent. Like, you need a man. Like, who are you to say you don't listen to your parents? But they still made me food. They still brought me stuff to my Chinatown, from Chinatown, right? I would take food home. But my mom said to me, honestly, one day, I'm retired. How are we going to pay rent? All we have is Social Security. And I was sending home money, but I knew it was not the solution they wanted because they are so prideful. And I just knew for the rest of my life, we would just be in this unhealthy, codependent dynamic. Until 9 months after I moved out, they got this piece of mail. And they took a picture and they asked me to send it up, like to translate it because I wasn't home. But now they have a smartphone because I've taught them how to use a smartphone. And I taught them also how to write in Chinese characters and also how to use the walkie-talkie feature on WeChat. So they're all good now. And it was a letter from affordable housing. They had won the lottery and gotten senior housing after almost a decade of being on the lottery. Wow. And I immediately took off work the next day to go to the office with them to translate. And I helped them fill out all the forms because they're all in English, of course, no language access. The next week we got the lease signed. And then a month later, they were so proud to have an elevator, no longer fifth floor walk up in Chinatown. And they got this new couch, new table with all the measly savings they had. And they asked me, hey, can you buy us a 50-inch television? Because they were going to spend the rest of their retirement on in affordable housing that was always going to be a third of their income, which meant for the rest of their lives, they were going to be able to live okay. And my mom pulled me aside and she kind of patted me on the back and she's like, Anh nè,我而家可以慳錢你。Now I can save money for you. Annie, I can be your mom now. Oh. And I have no idea how life would have been if we had been able to have money and to be okay and safe this whole time. This is why I'm a teacher, because I'm fighting for food and safety for our students, including right now during this pandemic. But now the past few years have just been a gift that my dad is no longer quite so angry and not disowning me anymore. But that we really just now get to spend quality time together without worrying so much. Thank you so much for listening.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. The sacrifices of our parents, especially migrant and immigrant parents, it's just something that I can't stop wanting to listen to their stories. And this is just so moving and also really funny. It reminded me of a time when my mom said to me, she was disowning me also for being, who I was. And I remember we were in this apartment, 11 children, my mother, my grandmother, my grandmother's boyfriend, in maybe 3 rooms in Bed-Stuy, and she's disowning me. And I'm like looking at her like, where are you disowning me from? I mean, there's nothing to inherit here, But I think when they say that, they're not talking about the materials. They're talking about the culture that we would lose if we were not with them and listening to their advice or their constant nagging, either way. But that's it's just a wonderful, wonderful example of how you've come full circle to understand them and for them to understand you. And it's a process for those of us who've had this kind of experience. It is a constant worry about our parents, and then, are they proud of us? Yes. Do they love us? And your mom's gesture was just lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And our final speaker, we have waited for our lone male in the group this evening, but only because I tried to alternate some of the stories, the kinds of stories that were being told. So now for our last storyteller, we have Andrew Mcgill, who is a Brooklyn native comic and storyteller. Andrew began his comedy career in his junior high school and has never looked back. Currently, he's making a name for himself in the New York comedy circuit while also graduating from Hunter College. By night, you can catch him hosting the Moth or performing at different venues throughout the New York City. But during the day, he is a New York City public school special educator teaching English at a high school in Harlem. Welcome, Andrew. Thank you for being a teacher and can't wait to hear your story.
Hey, thank you so much. I just want to give it up for Annie, Martha, Vanusha, Emily, everyone here, and Esmeralda as well. Thank you for hosting. Thank you all for showing up, and y'all who are here, thank you. We love you. I see you in the comments doing what you're doing. Hopefully you're having fun, and hopefully this is great. All right, here we go. So growing up, my older brother made me think I was adopted because my parents and my brother and my sister, they all had a different name, a last name imposed to me. So my parents are from Haiti. They came here, they got divorced, and my dad's last name is Petit Frere. So my brother and my sister both have that last name, Petit Frere. And my mom, after she divorced him, she just kept his maiden name. So she has Pierre Louis. So that's her last name. But my name is Andrew Mcgill. I have a middle name. I hate saying it. It's Andrew Peggy Mcgill. Fun fact, Andrew Peggy Mcgill is the name of the leprechaun on the Lucky Charms box. I'm just kidding, that's not his name, but it's believable. It is a very believable fact. But my brother made me think that I was adopted because of the fact that we all had different last names. He's like, no, you're adopted. We're all, born from our mom and dad, but you, a little different, you're a Mcgill. And him doing that, he made me think like, oh man, these people aren't my real family. So I used to imagine like what my real family was. Like my dad, he was a lawyer working out of UCLA. My mom, she studied and she taught at UCLA. I had 3 other siblings. One was really into fashion, kind of like ditzy. The middle one was like, a young Republican type. Really nice guy, but he loved Tom Jones. The youngest one was like, very like, she's smart, she's cool, but she's nothing really going. And then, they lived in Bel Air in a big old house, and then they had like a butler named Jeffrey. Yeah, and I get into shenanigans, and then one day I'd be able to tell my kids about how my life got flipped, turned upside down. But my chilling out Max and relaxing all cool. But I remember I was just thinking about it, and I remember my brother, he saw me on the computer one time, and I was looking up to find these Mcgills. I was like, Mcgills in California. And he's like, yeah, what are you doing? And I was like, yeah, I'm just looking for my family because I'm adopted and I'm gonna go find them. And he's like, he's like, you're an idiot. You're not adopted. And I was like, damn. And I don't know what was worse. My brother making me think I was adopted, or that he made me kill my imaginary family. And I hated it. I was like, man, this name has like given me enough trouble, not only at home, but also at school. I remember in the 6th grade, I had transferred to a new school in Long Island, and, you know, your teacher reads roll, and my teacher, Mr. Connolly, he's reading roll, and he's like, Andrew P. Mcgill. And, you know, kids all look around, you know, I do that. Hey, what's up? It's me. And I put my hand down, and the kid sitting next to me, he was like, yo, that's an interesting name. And he's like, yo, is that Irish? That's Irish, right? That sounds very Irish. And he's like, are you Irish? And I was like, nah, man, I'm not Irish. And he's like, so, okay, you're not Irish. That's a very interesting name, but what does the P stand for? And I was like, man, it's private. And he's like, oh, Andrew Private Mcgill? And I was like, no, man, it's personal. And he's like, oh, it's Andrew Personal Mcgill. And I was like, no, man. He's like, is it personal or private? I was like, please, man. And he's like, oh, so it's please? Andrew, please, Mcgill? I was like, no, it's Andrew Peggy Mcgill. Just leave me alone, man. It's Peggy. It's Andrew Peggy Mcgill. And the kid stopped for a second, and he like, I'd never seen him before. He like shook a little bit. His like eyes rolled to the back of his head. He's like, Andrew Peggy Mcgill? Peggy Mcgill? And he said, hey, this guy's name is Peggy. And they were like, and he's like, that's a crazy name. He's like, Andrew Peggy Mcgill. Hey, Andrew Peggy Mcgill. The teacher got into it. Mr. Connolly was like, hey, Andrew Peggy Mcgill. Hey. And I was like, I'm never going to say my name again. I hated it. So not only in the home, it was awful, not only in school, it was terrible, but also in like professional settings. When I started applying for jobs and just like sending out resumes, I would always do like phone interviews. And phone interviews were, you know, my bread and butter, because they'd read the resume and they'd be like, oh, Andrew Peggy Mcgill. Like, I know Andrew P. Mcgill. Like, I already know who this dude is. You know, Andrew P. Mcgill sounds like a beige guy. If you ever Google Andrew P. Mcgill, you look up images, it's just a bunch of white dudes. And then there'll be like a little picture of me. So I remember every single phone interview, I would crush it. And then when I'd go in for the in-person interview, they'd be like, oh, you're Mr. Mcgill. Okay, very colorful resume you got here. All right, buddy. And I remember this one time, I was on this phone interview and it was going very well. I knew the guy on the other line thought I was white, because after, you know, we talked about the job, we talked about the salary, we started talking about like Stranger Things. We started talking about avocados, different type of seltzer. And I was taking this phone interview on my phone, and you know, my friends were. I was like, "Yo, guys, calm down. I got to take this call real quick." And you know, I thought I muted myself, and I thought I muted it, and I was like, "Yo, nigga, shut up!" And I picked up the phone again, and I didn't mute it, and the dude on the other line was like, "Mr. Mcgill," and I was like, "Did you hear that?" And he's like, "Yeah." And there's just like a silence on the phone. He's like, can you come into work tomorrow? Can you start? But obviously I didn't take that job. I'm a teacher, of course. But it's always confused me. My name is always confusing to me. And it was always like, why do I have this name? And I remember this was like a couple of months ago. I was like, I need to call my mom. I got to go to the source. I got to ask her. Because every time I'd be like, yo, why'd you give me this name? She'd be like, you should have changed it years ago. And I was like, I'm not going to change it. It's my name. So I end up calling my mom on a Tuesday afternoon. And I was like, hey, so mom, so how did I get this last name Mcgill? And she was like, what do you mean? And I was like, yo, Andrew Peggy Mcgill. Like, how did I get that name? And she's like, oh, it's private. I was like, private? I was like, this is my name. And I'm like, what do you mean it's private? And she's like, oh yeah, it's personal. I was like, what do you mean private, personal? And she's like, please, Andrew, you should have changed it years ago. And I was like, Mom, please just tell me why I have this name. And she's like, all right, just call me. I'll call you in a couple of minutes. Please make sure you're alone. I was like, please make sure you're alone. She calls me back and she's like, are you alone? I was like, yeah, I am alone. She's like, are you sure you weren't followed? I was like, please, Mom, please just tell me why I have this name. I'm not gonna put this on live. I'm not going live on Instagram. This is not on speakerphone. I'm not with all my friends. I was like, please just tell me why I have this name. And she gets real quiet and she was like, so, you know, me and your father, you know, we weren't together when I was pregnant with you. And I was like, oh snap. So maybe I really do have a dad in UCLA. And she's like, no, he is still your father. But, you know, we divorced and, you know, I still needed to get my green card. I still need to get my papers. So there was a dude that a friend of a friend knew, and his name is Anthony Mcgill. And they were like, hey, can you marry this woman? And she's like, I'll give you $500. And we got married so I could get my green card. So basically my mom is like Summer Walker. And I was like, wait, Mom, you could have just taken the test. You know, there was a test, right? You didn't have to, you didn't have to marry this guy. But it turns out my mom is not she's not a good test taker. It turns out. And so she married this guy. And then shortly after I was born, you know, they got divorced. But it was still confusing. I was like, so, you know, when I was like, so what happened? She's like, so when, you know, the hospital, when I had you out of the hospital, you know, all my documents had Suzette Mcgill. So they just, you know, called you. I already had Andrew. So I was like, Andrew Mcgill. I was like, all right, cool. I get the Mcgill part of this. But I was like, but what about the Peggy? That doesn't really make sense. It's a weird, and she's like, oh, I just threw it in as a garnish. I was like, oh, garnish. So Andrew P. Mcgill also is Parsley, is Andrew Parsley Mcgill. And I was like, hey, my mom, so whatever happened to like Anthony? Like, did you ever keep contact with him? Like, how's he doing? Like, what's going on with him? And she was like, who? I was like, Anthony, the dude that he got the green card for. And she's like, oh, I have no idea. She's like, who cares? I'm an American now. And a bald eagle flew behind her head and it was draped with an American flag. And then she's like, yeah, I have no idea what happened to this man. And I was like, all right, cool. And then she just hung up. And it hit me. Something hit me. I was like thinking about it and processing it. And I always thought growing up, my name wasn't Haitian enough. I thought my name was too American. I thought my name didn't match the identities of like my family and the people that I lived with. You know, I thought I was adopted. I thought I didn't really fit in, you know, at home. I thought I didn't fit in at school because I was like, it sounds like an Irish name. But I realized something in that moment, that my name is one of the most Haitian names ever because of the story that it holds. You know, my mom literally gave me this name from a dude that she married to get a green card illegally, not illegally, but legally, you know what I mean? And it was something that hit me, and it's a cool thing to realize how much names hold weight. And I used to say, oh man, I hate my name. I hate Peggy Mcgill. It doesn't really match, you know, my family. It doesn't match, you know, the struggles of Haitian people, but it's literally the most Haitian name of all time. And I love it and I appreciate it. And as strange as it is, it encapsulates, you know, the American dream of coming here, of my parents trying to coming here, and trying to make a name for themselves and a name for their kids. And that name is Andrew Peggy Mcgill. Thank you very much and have a great night.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing. You know, what everyone this evening spoke about either the secrets that we hold from our families or the secrets that our families hold from us. And I think it's so interesting. I know that it's not a particularly quality of people who come from other places to the United States. I mean, I think all families hold all kinds of secrets, but I think you are going to get some genealogists so confused when they start going back. It's going to be a real issue for some of them. But that was really a wonderful story. And I think you're right. You know, you represent who you are. And the name represents that. And, you know, I think it's a wonderful, wonderful story. And I think it's really, I love your mother's story. One of my siblings did that. You know, they were the married person to somebody who needed the, but that story actually ended up differently because the man who married my sister ended up falling in love with her. So it was like reversed, you know, and they were together for many, many years, and we all loved him, and he did get his papers. So, you know, it goes, just these stories are so full and so rich and so real. And I just really thank all of you for sharing these stories with us. I know that I don't read fast enough to go through all these comments that we've had here, but I know the audience has absolutely enjoyed it very much. And before, when we were talking about this a day or two ago about this event, I was wondering if any of you have any questions for one another, having listened to the stories right now. Do you have a curiosity for any of the other storytellers that you might like to ask? Nothing really comes up. I was full of questions for all of you. We could probably go on for hours. And I think, Marta, I know we want to keep you on, right? Because we know that you have many, many more stories to tell us. But I would just like to thank then all of you for being a part of our evening. I'm very, very grateful to you, the audience, and for your wonderful welcome to these fantastic storytellers. And I hope that there will be another opportunity in which you will see them in person, because it is this was a wonderful event, but it's even richer when we're actually able to let them know how much we appreciate what they're saying, and we can give them some feedback. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you, Emily. Thank you for the Katona Museum of Art for organizing this evening and for this fantastic exhibit, which I hope people will have an opportunity to see before it finishes its run.
Thank you. I think we do have a few minutes for audience questions. If anybody
Wonderful.
has any questions for our storytellers. I know, it always feels like we're putting you guys on the spot here.
It's really stunning though, because these stories are all so different, and they bring up with so many, they bring up so many issues about our lives in the United States, whether we were born here or we came from another place. I mean, I think that Vanusha's courage, you know, her desire to learn English and to be very specific. She wanted American English. She did not want to speak, you know, like E.M. Foster or any of those people. I think your courage was just really very moving to me when you were talking about this, and that you were very determined to have the kind of life that you were envisioning, and that in fact so much of it is triggered by a piece of music that is just so recognizably American part of you know, American music. That was really so wonderful. And Marta, you know, that harrowing story, I mean, how one continues on, you know, I mean, of course you cannot ever forget it. Do you ever wonder about those people, about that young man so many years ago? You know, what might have happened to him? Is that something that ever occurs?
Yeah, of course. You wonder if the child survived the war, and you wonder how many children are like that. You know, how many children have actually parents that would risk their lives to, this was very risky for his father to come all the way to the hospital with all his men and put him through this treatment. It was a very risky move from his father. So yeah, you wonder, but also, you know, I think we all come from backgrounds where some things that are not normal become normalized. And so for the outsider, for the person that did not grow up in Colombia at that time, this may seem, you know, completely heroic and all that. And I feel that you are raised in that environment and you grow up to do what you have to do. And as I said, that situation with the bombing and the narco traffic, the paramilitaries, the confrontation between all these forces had become normal to us. And so I think part of what's seen there as heroic and courageous was like a survival mechanism that you develop. You know, you wish it wouldn't happen to you, but I was not the only one. Also, I've had classmates that attended dental school with me, and they later came to performances in New York, and they were also brought to tears because these memories come back. And now that you live in another environment, you go, how did I go through that? How did I? And they all went through it. They had children die in their arms, and they had, you know, all sorts of horrible things happen that at the time you just dealt with it and you moved on. It was not like you could, you know, I'm retiring today from my residency and I'm going home. You had to move on. And so, and I think is the same for countries that not just Colombia, every country that has been at war, that has seen difficult things happen to humans. If you're there and you want to survive, you normalize a lot of things that are not normal. And so, yeah, you wonder about, to answer the question, do I wonder about the child? Yeah, and I wonder about his parents and about who I was at that time too. This is a long time ago. And so, and how that carries on in me. That helps you also, I think everybody here who's an immigrant agrees with the fact that all of those experiences harden you and give you the strength to, you know, to like get out of that Burger King bathroom and wipe your tears and go, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think all of that builds you. So to the point that you can say, my name is Peggy and I like it. Right?
It's
and
true.
I also wanted to point out that with Annie and Vanusha, in the stories, when you use your language to convey the messages from your aunt or your mother or your dad, I find that it's so, language is such an intimate piece of a puzzle that connects you to people, not culturally, but linguistically. You know, you find the person that speaks your language, and the connection there is not about your culture or the town that you're from. There's something more primal inside that connects with that person. And when you use your language in your respective languages in your story, I think that, you know, we appreciate the little translation afterwards, but I think everybody knows what they're saying. In the way you express the feeling of your relative, your mom, your aunt. You know, it's beautiful to find out the exact words that they mean, but I don't speak any Cantonese. And of course I don't speak any Polish. And I can tell that something important was said and it got to me, even though I didn't know the words. So very well delivered. Yeah. And I love the fact that Andrew has come back to, I have 2 adopted children. And so this whole, you know, the way the whole story begins, it's so beautiful to find out that you end up finding out that you're a biological child, but that you have adopted your name and welcome him back to your life. That's the true, you're the biological parent of your name and you love him the same.
That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. That was really good. That was lovely. And yes, I was very moved by that. And I wanted to, when Annie, when you were telling your story and when you did speak Cantonese, and you had a sort of an opposite experience from Vanusha, who comes from Poland and she's trying to learn English, and you, in order to connect to your parents, then you have to then learn their language, because they're not going to say, I love you in the way that you're used to. They can only say it in their way. So that was very, very moving. Do you have something more to tell us about that experience? Or?
Yeah, once I figured out their love language was acts of service, which is just the universal language of like Chinese people, I feel like, and immigrants. I was like, oh, like they have been telling me they love me all along. It's just words of affirmation are not a thing for them, and that is fine. But I have been taking Cantonese classes because I have to. Like if I ever have kids, I know I'm gonna have to pass it on to them as well. So it's hard because some of these languages are dying languages too, and like less and less people are learning Cantonese. So it feels like that psychic connection is like leaving every so often. Someone asked in the questions, did any of your parents return to their home country? My mom still hasn't gone back to China since she moved here. And I hope one day they will accept my money and go with me to China. But they are so prideful. And I hope I can return the acts of service to them, or be able to give them a gift.
Yes.
We will see.
Yeah. That's a great question. Vanusha, your parents did have a connection to their home country after you were here?
My parents stayed. I was the only one who moved here. My parents came years later for my wedding, and then they stayed for 5 years, and then they went back. And I had my ex-husband used to say, you know, when you invite Polish people, they're not leaving, you know, because my parents came only for the wedding, and then they stayed for 5 years.
Well, how wonderful for you, though, to have them nearby, right? And to share this experience with them.
But then I moved. They stayed in New York, and I moved with my ex-husband. There was a period of time where I did not want to. I loved my family so much, but the connection was almost too crippling for me. I needed, I kept, you know, I worked it out, but it was, the love was so intense that in Poland at that time, nobody moved away from your family. You just build an addition to the house. My sister never left home. She married. They lived in the same house. And so for my parents to let me go, my mother said afterwards, she said, if we knew what that meant, we were crazy to let you go. And I was like, thank God they were crazy momentarily, because I would not, it was more for me. Like I often think of that story when I'm telling it, is it still relevant because of what this country meant for me? And I keep examining, is still this country of that desire that I had, you know, is it still relevant, or is it falling apart? And I just, sometimes I want to, like, programs like this of immigrants, like I wish it was a traveling show going through the whole country. So people who might not be so open to immigrants understood, and maybe they would be proud of like what we saw here. And like, I think it would be a compliment to them. Like, this is what we want it to be, but we are not beggars, you know. It's just like, because there's misunderstanding, like all these poor countries, and it's just, no, there's a lot of rich in Europe and Eastern Europe. And I'm so glad I grew up in Poland. I feel like I had the best of two worlds, but I just so appreciate that this was put together, because it's important.
Yeah, it is important. I thought, you know, and I mean, your scream, I think we've all had that moment when you just have to, and you're very lucky that Anna, or your friend, gave you the space to do that, you know,
Yeah.
said, sometimes you just need to do that. And that was a gift, you know, that you could not have had any other way.
I never raised my voice until
Yeah.
then, never.
That's lovely. So Andrew, do you have a connection to Haiti? Did your parents go back or?
Yeah, they go back fairly, I guess not all the time, but I think like every couple of years they'll go back. I think recently, I think Haiti just had their like president just got assassinated. So I mean, it's kind of like a little wild. I mean, when is it not wild? But I think they, you know, they go back from time to time. They do a lot of like work with a lot of, because they're my uncles and aunts and family are still all over there. Or some family and cousins are there. So sometimes I'll get a call of people asking me, hey, I'm gonna come to America and like, do you have money? And I'm like, nah, I'm just a teacher. I don't have any money. Sorry. But we could hang and I'll take you to some spots, but I don't have any money. Someone also asked, I saw this question. They asked if I use my comedy background in education work. And I guess I think just when you do comedy, you're just kind of just like, yeah, I mean, I've seen nothing like ever really surprises me unless it's like, whoa. So I'm never like, oh, taken aback. So I guess it does help from time to time, but also like sometimes I'll like crack jokes on some kids from time to time. And, they don't like it. I teach 11th and 9th grade. Sometimes they're like, oh, he's a dick. And I'm like, it is what it is. But yeah, they'll fine. They'll learn. They're learning how to read and they'll pass their tests. So I make sure they're
good. They'll figure it out. I think it's, especially when I meet Puerto Ricans, they always ask me, when was the last time you were in Puerto Rico? Like, it's like, we need to know whether we still have a connection to the homeland. And I just, I was wondering if you all had that same kind of thing. It's just it's so interesting that we, being there, I didn't go for 12 years when I was, from the time that I arrived in the United States to when I was able to afford to go to Puerto Rico. So it was 12 years. And so it was like going to a different, really a foreign country to me. It was not the place that I remembered. And of course, the people that I had known were no longer in the same place and those kinds of things. But still, this is one of the big icebreakers with Puerto Ricans is, when was the last time you were in Puerto Rico? And of course, we talk a lot about the food and things and Bad Bunny and all the music and all the great things that are happening. I'm dying to meet him. So it's fascinating that even though we're here, there's a part of us that is still informing our everyday lives, and whether it's because those of us who speak our native languages or other countries' language by necessity because of our family members, sometimes for our work, or for me, sometimes, I live in a suburb of New York City and I don't really know that many Spanish speakers around here. And sometimes I just really literally talk to myself in Spanish when nobody else is listening, just because I want to hear it. And that like Marta was saying, this linguistic connection is very different from the other kinds of connections that we have when we come from another place. And I think the language is one that touches us in a different way, whether it's fraught with tension because we don't know it well enough, which happens to many people, or for people like me who would love to hear it more, but don't get as much an opportunity to do it as I would like. So it is something that's ever present. I dream in Spanish more often than I remember in English, but I also dream in languages I don't speak. So you just know that there are other languages out there, but this one belongs to me. And that makes a very different kind of person than a person who doesn't have access to two languages and two cultures.
Thank you so much, Esmeralda. Thank you to all of our storytellers. Thank you to our audience. This was such a lovely, touching, funny, wonderful evening of storytelling. Please come to Arrivals. It closes in a few weeks, January 23rd. You still have a few more weeks to come. It's a lovely show. We're all very proud of it. And please discover more about our storytellers, Annie Tan at Annie Tangent, great handle, and Vanusha, this is her website. So I know they would love you to follow them, to find where they're performing. Andrew, I know, is performing as well. And again, thank you so much for joining us. This was such a pleasure. And have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Esmeralda. And
thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
It was lovely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Esmeralda.